can continue, please? Sorry. Thank you so much, and sorry for making you play it without the repeat. I assume it perhaps gave you a little bit of surprise, right? Yeah. It's the redemption moment, the repeat. Well, if it went well the first time. Okay, first and foremost, it's a French overture style per key opening. It's a very noble piece, and you have to be aware that in the notation of the Baroque time, when they wanted to write a triplet that didn't have 3 notes, but the value of 3 notes, like quarter-eighth note, they wrote it equal. They only would write the 3 notes, like here, if he had written, but because it's a quarter-eighth note, it is still to be expected to be played. Is the purpose for the partita number 2, edited and published since Bach's own notation, that they didn't dot the rest, but it was supposed to be dotted, or it's expected to be dotted. It's because the music of the time was played in the time, so they had the experience of their own fashion of the day for those things, and it's important to take this in account. Have you played harpsichord? No. At all? Yeah. Okay. So the patterns of the 16th notes are called tiratas in Italian harpsichord jargon, if you want. It's sort of like a slide, almost like what we call a glissando. And even they call it bleeding on the keyboard. So I would suggest to open with a dotted 8th note rest and play tighter stretto the 16th notes, so that you arrive directly to the note which is low, the dominant. And bring out every first of the 3. You know Mozart's last sonata? You know, he visited Johann Christian Bach, and he let him in London look at some of the scores of his father, though he didn't know the 48, but some he did even arrange for string trio. So, of course, you can argue that any composer can write arpeggios on a root position tonic. Because it's the hunt of the French horn sign. So anyway, I don't pretend that Mozart stole it from Bach, but there is a cousinage. Another reason I ask you if you played harpsichord is because when we play on the piano the equal eighth notes, often in the left hand like a continuo, they should be bowed, what the continuo used to be with the da gamba or the cello. It's very rare that they would have used staccato detached for each note of the eighth notes, provided they were not rhythmized. But in this case, because Bach is a pedagogue, he makes this score be more a template than a finished work. But people then was expected, when you were a student of Bach, you're not expected to play the piece for him. You were supposed to do or something else on the same pattern of the harmonic progression. Times are past, we recite our text, and it's fine. But we need to know that. And so I would like you to bring out is a little accent, a bright sunshine light, the first of each three in the first bar. And this way, it's not really an accent, but it's almost. Another thing about these triplets, you see where they are in the left hand, like bar 8? Sorry, I'm speaking very fast because I'm so excited. But I have to calm down because the music excites me and teaching excites me. So I will just go back to the fact that when you play triplets, like bar 8, it's more expected by the bowing to play 2 and 1, like on the downbeat, long, short. Yes, I'm sorry. What did you say? I think somebody spoke, right? I heard somebody speak.
I think it was a mistake. I don't think you have to worry about it.
Well, I don't worry. I just ask because if there is a contribution or a contradiction, I gladly accept. I'm just wanting to ask if I missed something being suggested. That's why I stopped. Should I continue or? Okay. So I suggest that 99% of the time the triplets are slurred 2 and 1, long and short. And from time to time, you can invert that with the Lombardic rhythm, as we call it, which is the short, long on the downbeat. And of course, you can make a combination with. The question is if it becomes too characteristic. Since it's only a bridge, you could think, okay, it's overly intense, it could be a little less separated to be more elegant, but in any case it shouldn't be all detached. I studied with Sviatoslav Richter and I asked him when he recorded them how did he choose the tempi and the phrasings, and he told me that the next day would have been different. So much for me getting some system. And when you hear Gould, he detaches most things but with the phrasing direction. And so between the legato, which used to be the Russian Soviet school, legato everything, and then Gould, I think the middle way is to really take the patterns for what they are in terms of his bowings. Do you picture bar 9, third beat, right hand? You have an E in the soprano, which becomes this most beautiful, expressive suspension 9/8. Sorry for singing, but it's the only way I know, so I say is because in the singing I can sustain it, but the piano decays. And so I think that when you have such a beautiful, expressive third beat out of 4 suspension with the resolution, you're expected to restrike it. Whenever the D holding on the downbeat of bar 10 is only 2 quarter notes rather than 3 with the half tied to the quarter, this one stays on the modern piano. You still hear the 7th of the dominant, but the E you wouldn't. So this would be allowed to be replayed. When you play the original version of your 2x2s, you play the second staccato and the first tenuto, like hiccups. I personally think that it's better to, if not connect, at least not separate. Something like, if you were to do the equal rhythm interpretation, which is what is published, printed. And of course the people who know the tradition of the notation will play, but even if you play the triplet, you still wouldn't play the second of the 2 shorter, regardless. I don't know if I will convince you, but at least I give you my vision of the patterns and the elements. In bar 5, the bass note has 2 dotted rhythms on each beat, which are in fact to be aligned with the triplets of the right hand. Therefore, they should be written as quarter eighth note, quarter eighth note. Because again, in the Baroque notation, they didn't write an eighth note, 16th, quarter note, eighth note triplet, because it didn't have the value only, but not the notes of the triplet. So they wrote a dotted rhythm. But in fact, it was meant to be aligned. So they wrote dotted rhythm, but in fact, it was a triplet. And if you hear Dame Myra Hess' transcription of Jesu meine Freude, the dotted rhythm in the Bach cantata notation is reduced to a triplet to match with the third note. Because it corresponds to the tradition of the notation for the interpretation.
Emile?
Yes?
I have a question because I played this piece once many years ago to somebody who seemed to be a somewhat of a Baroque expert. He was, in any case, a friend of Elizabeth Wright.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him, should this be played? And he said, well, more likely, and so I'm wondering how much certainty and uncertainty is there about this?
Well, I have full certainty because I was there and I heard him. Because the treatises about ornamentation, notation, and interpretation in the Baroque are so beautiful that once you finish reading them, you know nothing. And so I came to the conclusion that if I have a conviction and I have a knowledge about notation, then I put the conviction to match the notation, and then I somehow have an opinion that seems not only whimsical. But to be honest, I'm also a friend of Professor Wright, and she quotes you every time for the fact that you have asked her one day, what are those eyelashes on the score? this notation of the appoggiaturas without the full notes. And she always says,
I knew what those were.
she says, Professor Hart always speaks and asks about these eyelashes. So for me, you see, now I'm connected with you for the eyelashes. But I must say that regardless, if they're played later in the third ballade, I have convictions about compared to. So in fact, I think when the composer doesn't give us the full answer, is that he gives us some room to come up with something. I noticed that when you played the opening, you played the second bar way slower in tempo than the first. You played 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and then you held back. Because there is an opposition of 4/4 into 2/2 because it's a cut time on 12/8. And I think that you should not alternate the pulse. You should flow. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. But Edward, when the opening of the second partita is written, I think it's totally right to play it because that's how it's notated. But if one knows that they didn't dot the rest, but dotted only the note, then we do. And honestly, it doesn't change anything, really, structurally. It's just, you know. But it's good to know because that's why the purpose of an university is to teach the universal knowledge and then choose what you do with it. And I appreciate that input, Edward, very much. Thank you. And I must say that, so back to Yuexuan, when you played the bar 16 and I didn't allow you to play the repeat, it was with a purpose in mind, not because I was bored. When you play the last bar of the first half, bar 16, which ends conveniently on the dominant, you restart on the tonic. But the second time, you stay on the dominant to start from the dominant to the tonic. So what I suggest to do is first time ending improvised cadenza, which you'll notate. Which will contrast with the second time. And I personally tie the second time to the downbeat of the next downbeat because our piano decays further. 1. So I created two endings, typically. One to restart and one to continue on the same harmony. And in the same way, when you finish at bar 56, you go back to the dominant, and then when you finish, and please don't return to the endings. Don't. Bach is a tap water, flows. You just interrupt the tap, but the water goes on in the pipes. It's like joining a tramway in motion and dropping out of it while it continues in motion. It's very rare to have these emphatic endings to say, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, but Bach didn't write a coda, so I'm going to give you an extra emphatic ending. I mean, it's not wrong, because it's a good taste to do that, but I find that redundant. Aspect or other, the prelude is there to prepare the fugue, and the purpose of the prelude, which was originally improvised, not developed, but here for pedagogical reasons Bach displays it and even develops it, is that the purpose of the prelude and fugues in each key was because of the tuning that allowed to play with the perfect octaves in every key, including in more useful keys. D major, of course, everybody played in, but also in some keys rarely played. And so the prelude was there to bring the listener to soak in and to immerse in the tonality for the fugue, because in the Prelude and Fugue, the fugue is it. The Prelude is to prepare to it. And so that's why I think that the big ritenuto at the end of the Prelude sort of separates the two, and I think they are, if not connected, at least they have a certain necessity of tension for a release, which is the subject of the fugue starting. As if all the purpose of this was to say tonic, second or fourth degree, deceptive cadence, the best tool to avoid finishing too early. Now the beauty is that Bach adds a lot of more than only cadence. Okay, we're ready to do the fugue now. He really develops it beautifully, but I still think that is the purpose for which I don't think is necessary to play ritenuto at the end of the Prelude. Do you see bar 38? Second beat, left hand, the stab. Oh, that was good. Whew. Should be more careful. Did you see the stab in the left hand on the second beat? Did you expect it?
No.
Exactly. And because people think that major and minor dramatic effects are only for romantic era music, and Bach is a Baroque after all, you know, how does he feel, musically speaking? Rachmaninoff, Scriabin, Berg, we're all in super expressionism, but here it is very striking. And all of a sudden, arrives in the middle of the third beat of 40. And so I would not play legato in diminuendo, the left hand on 38. I would do a crescendo and an interruption to indicate that something happened. My God, somebody planted a stab in me. And I would even slow down for once there more than at the end, because I think it's a moment of affect, exclamazione, as the Italians said before Bach. Almost as if it was a cadenza. If you had written this, who say, yeah, no good. Or in the sense, the major in Bach is not as positive as the minor is, let's say, if not negative, happy, sad, very simplistic for romantic music. I think they're more interchangeable. Like book 2, the second of book 1. It's so motoric that it's tainted in minor, but it's not really tragic or sad, or, you know, you cannot do that because it really doesn't work. But some of the Bach music, while it has this effect for the minor, as we saw earlier towards the end, it's in D major, so yes, it's perky and very driven, but I still think that it's okay. It's okay. It's not so major than that. It's not so minor than that. It's sort of let's call it optimistic. Now, starting the second half, bar 17, I noticed that you are very kneading the beats, right? And so what I was suggesting earlier about the pattern, to give an impulse on the first of the three, was a progressive impulse, like each impulse is a little bit less than the preceding. So that you have, and yes, you have an arrival that is loudest on the downbeat of the second bar, but you wouldn't have, and so I think you should always be careful, because the fortepiano being a percussive instrument, our accents get even quickly out of control compared to what they were meant to be in a bowing. More in it's like indentation rather than a hole in the bulge of the line. It's difficult to hold it from not being all lame or being over, because then the one breaks too much, the other one connects too much. It's more, that's why it helps to always think in group of beats. What matters is where you go. It's not where you are on each beat. So if you project yourself at least one group of bars ahead, you go somewhere. And of course you don't play that, but you think that. Like a conductor, always bringing ahead to the next arrival point of the phrase, and the orchestra follows or goes to him or her. Have you been told by Baroque specialists that the modern trills are in Baroque music played on the top note?
Yes, I heard that.
Yes, except that in bar 19 you come from the top note. Therefore, when it comes from the top note, you have to play the real note. And then bar 20, third beat, coming from C sharp, you can use the appoggiatura of the upper note, which is the characteristic of the Baroque. So I don't think you should do for the first, yes, no, but for the second, I agree. In other words, it doesn't really matter because people don't notice these things. It's just an embellishment. But I think it's important to take it in account, because if the rule is applicable, it has to be having exceptions that confirm the rule. And the exception is when you come from the upper note melodically. In the third ballade, Chopin, who imitates so much the Baroque, he does that with the anticipation and the repeat note on the downbeat, on the note. But then in Chopin, the trills are shakings of the soul. It's a vibrato. Whenever here, it's more about the prolongation of the sound. It's not that, well, everybody has different opinions again about how to play the ornaments. Fast, slow, on the beat, above the beat. On the idea of the appoggiatura, which means literally appoggiare, which means to lean, is that you lean from the upper note because it's the dissonance, and then you release on the top, on the tension release of the unison. So it's a delay tactics to give the real note a little delay so that you can taste its beauty. Its fruition is blossoming after the tension of the overstated preceding harmony note is replayed. And if you repeat it several times, it becomes obviously a trill. So many appoggiaturas in a row after a mordent become a trill. Mordent comes from the French mordre, which means bite. So you bite the next note to you. But when you buy it on a plucked instrument, you don't hear tika 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 ta. You hear more like an impulse on the first note, and then the next note is being plucked, so you hear the first one by resonance. If you imitate on the piano, which kind of silly, you would sound like. It doesn't really work. And on the piano, you have to articulate each note. But still, you can bring out more the appoggiatura B than the real note A. I don't think that we can define for sure how every trill was played, because it depends in which context it's placed. Thematic, passing, tone, or any. But in this case, I think you have a perfect example of one that comes from the B, which I think should be played on the real note, and 2 beats later on the upper note. That's at least what I think, since you asked me. Bar 26, make sure that the listeners who don't have the score hear that the D sharp doesn't go melodic into the C natural. The augmented second is very characteristic for Arabic and Turkish music. That's why they call it in tonal harmony the harmonic minor, which means that the leading tone goes to the tonic and the other degree, the sixth, goes down to the dominant. So in other words, if you see the upper stems, and then you see the bottom stems of the C natural, you should not play in a continuum of same energy, because it's only an illusion, it's not the reality. Of course, if Bach really wanted not to have this confusion or this ambiguity, he could have placed it in the other hand. Then there's no ambiguity at all. Now, perhaps ultimately, voicing according to the stems up and down, the voices that stop and another one starts. If it's 2 timbres in an orchestra, you hear it. If it's flute and oboe. If it's piano and piano, you hear it combined. And in order to not hear it combined, I think you're obliged to do at least some kind of light and shadow. Especially because after the second beat rest, it goes to F sharp. And then literally goes to G on the second beat of bar 27. So when you finish singing the soprano, and 1, sorry for the natural. So in other words, I think that the low stems in the right hand bar 26 should be played softer in order to give a chance to follow what the melody of the top is doing when interrupted by the entrance of this plus the rest of its second beat. So you can hear something like this. And same thing on the third beat of 28. That is an assumed combination. Sol, si, mi, re, mi, sa, fa, la, do, re, mi, sol, si, mi, re, mi, sa, fa, la, do, re, mi, but it's not. It's sol, si, mi, re, mi, la, do, re, mi, and the E is a suspension in this case, not an appoggiatura because it's tight. But if it's played a very articulated light touch, and you don't hear enough of the holding pattern of the note that holds, then you don't hear it and it becomes a combination. I mean, you hear that every day in Bach. People combine the same hand, 2 patterns with upper and lower stems, unless you see it. And so the question is, do you play what you see? Do you play what you hear? Do you bring out, by choices of lights and shadows, chiaroscuro, says the Italians, some kind of reading of it which is very personal? Or then you say, ladies and gentlemen, I give you the 3 parts, and you figure it out. I just give you all. And in a way, that's the objectivity that we hear very often played. So it's possible that it's more an intention in the notation for the student of Bach to learn how to play polyphony in the same hand. But then again, the length of sound that they had on the harpsichord didn't allow either for too much of that voicing. So anyway.
Emile?
Yes.
Emile?
Yes.
Don't forget that we have 2 more players.
Not to mention a fugue.
Yes.
Thank you for being such a gentle reminder. Would you like to play the fugue, please, if you don't mind? Or do you need to play the end of the prelude to get yourself back into the energy and then connect them? It's as you like. Do you know many themes that start with 3 repeated notes?
Yeah.
That's because Beethoven takes something very simple and makes it into something very essential. Because he dramatizes these repeated notes like the knock of destiny on the door. Whatever. I think in Bach, you have either fugues that are liturgical vocal, which I think is this one, or you have the very finger ones for finger virtuosity, like G major. And here you have a cut time indication, which sort of suggests that you're not going to be playing in 4/4, holding down the beats, but flowing. Since we don't have an invention of the metronome in Bach's time, alas. Rutex would have had such a trick with it. But unfortunately, it only came in 1820s in Vienna, marketed by Melzel. But in Bach's time, we have to only assume the tempo from the either notational indication of the meter, as here it is cut time, as well as from the pattern. And here the repeated notes are melodic. When you sing in a liturgical, let's say, SATB motet, I want to tell you how much I want to tell you, or Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, you use syllables on repeated notes, which when sang don't sound repeated because we change the syllable. Therefore, the purpose, the meaning of the text overtakes the melodic line or lack of in terms of step motion, like on the piano. So for the pianists to play correctly and meaningfully those repeated notes here, which unlike in Beethoven where they're like stabbing intensity, here it's more lyrical singing. Imagine it was written had written that, nobody would say, Bach is bad. In fact, I think we get, because of the percussive capacity of the piano, and many repeated notes that are thematically meaningful in music after Bach, instrumentally speaking, we tend to hear it a little percussive, which is the essence of what the piano is, a percussive instrument with the denial that we sing on it. And I ideally suggest for the touch to replay the note halfway up before the key is fully up, fast, deep, so you can hear ta ha ha ta. I know that students are very worried that it won't repeat at all, because some pianos have better second escapement clicking than others. But if you can control it, it really sounds for what it is. Sung 3 notes. Like, and if you hear it, then the character is very vindicative in the repeated notes and very melodic in the ending. Why didn't he do this? In the second half. Of course, we don't know why he didn't do it, and it's not a speculation to say he could have, but my point is that the repeated notes are in this liturgical style music are more like changing syllables in a continuum of a sentence through words, rather than participating to an articulation, repeated intensity that has a sense of passionate restatement, like in the end of the Mozart Fantasy in C minor. At least I feel that those repeated notes are very dramatic before Beethoven wrote his symphony, but in that same vein. And not. So if you don't want to risk that it doesn't repeat by trying to play it on a piano's unsecure second escapement, then at least what you can do is to play it with the finger rising as high, but when you replay it, a little less articulated. Don't let it completely. Because I think that is the touch to bring it more as a singing fugue rather than an instrumental fugue. Do you want to try? Bravo! What is? Oh, it's a Steinway, of course. It has a second escapement. Beautiful. Another thing, you're very good at what you did, bar 12. I assume I have to thank your teacher for this, because you played the crossing in the same pot in the same hand. I even went like this when you were playing, like, yeah, she made it! Because 99% of the pianists play. It's so difficult to voice with weak fingers, and it's really provocative to write it in thirds, so close, so you don't hear. But we heard the do, fa, mi, re versus mi, fa, mi, re. I imagine it was part of the purpose of Bach writing these, so he can see how his students deal with cross relations in the same hand, no? Did it give you trouble in the first place?
No.
Never?
Yeah.
Bravo! So you're a natural polyphonist on the keyboard. What did you do to learn it, the fugue? Did you just play it through until you memorized it, or at least patterns?
Actually, I play two voices. I always choose two and only play them, and like that makes me hear the different voices more clear, like that.
So my advice is that when you have a week, which probably you won't have until retirement, given the amount of schooling we all do, but let's say in ideal situation, take 2 days to copy it on 4 parts by hand. 4 staffs, not piano. And then take 2 days after that to write it the same but from memory and without the keyboard. Then start playing it from your own 4 parts, reading it while you play. And at the end of that, you go back to the 2 staffs notation, which is the pianist's readability. Because I think that it's the only way that secures the flow of knowledge of the parts throughout. If not, we do, and you do it very well, for some sections more than for others. In other words, you have a different percentage of voicing according to the sections of the fugue. Please don't ritenuto the ending. And please don't diminuendo it. Please don't belittle it. Please don't cutify it. Please don't do, oh God, you did also, which is a beautiful emotional thing in B minor around 22, right? You played softer. Dynamically speaking, no? Yeah, it's not a sonata. You don't have a second theme for a different character emotionally. Here it's a single theme that generates its answers and its contrasubjects, everything. So I don't think in a fugue you need to dress it up in dynamic, dramatic changes. I think we need to just follow everything. If you try to do that, is a way to say at the get-go, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, this is brutally unaudible if played throughout with all the voices. So if I make a little bit of nuances here and there, since I play the modern piano, and I understand that option, after all, it's not about harpsichord or fortepiano, it's about voices, singing voices. I remember asking Richter again during my lessons, how do I bring out the subject every time I hear it in the fugue, or the answer? And he said by playing all the contra subjects, because he said if you bring out every time the entrances, then it becomes a mono voice piece with accompaniment. And then he added that impossible sentence to understand mysteriously to me. He said, smell every second rose. And he never explained what he meant. But I think what it really means in terms of the fugue is that it's a fact that the prelude is a sort of an improvisatory, free fantasy, toccata, exploration of articulations and touches, installment in the tonality. Fine, that is sort of a freestyle. And the fugue is much more, not even instrumental, regardless on which instrument you play it. It's more the voices themselves. The voices, the intervals, the patterns. As somebody said once that the contrapuntal organization of voices is idealization of society, especially in the autocratic societies of their time. And so to have four voices that have, so to say, equal importance, it's quite something. Try to bring four kids to the toy department together. You'll lose them. And same thing happens here. Try to follow the four voices throughout. At some points, we all of us, me included, we surrender to the harmonization. I mean, come on, SATB, we hear that. It's very little rhythmicity, so it's all about the flow of the elements. So that's why I was saying, in order not to have sporadic elements of quality voicing layered, you need to have it layered throughout. So you won't need dynamic changes, you won't need anything except follow the four parts. Once you follow the four parts with your ear, you don't need all these effects of softer and louder. At least not in the fugue, in my opinion. And it's very understandable that you do it at the end, diminuendo and ritenuto. Except he doesn't finish on a downbeat. So he could have if he wanted. But he chose to not finish on a downbeat because to him there is no down and up beat. It's just a cadence, which happens to be perfect. I know it sounds unemphatically ending. It sounds like interrupted. But basically that's what it is. And people do that a lot in the partitas. God, they finish every dance with a little ending. Which is individually right for each section, this included. But I still think that unless, like in the chromatic fantaisie, like he took the time to have a coda like Chopin. It's always chromatically dropping. I think that in some cases he doesn't, and most in the preludes and fugues he doesn't do. though it's very tempting, no? You see, I said some things which are part of my knowledge, part of what I learned, and part of my experience as a performer, as a teacher. I know very well that some elements you'll say, why not? Some you'll say, absolutely not. Some you'll say, hey, I might try that. And ultimately, perhaps some of these ideas will merge with other ideas of other directions that you receive in your life. And I just had to tell you where I stand with the piece aesthetically on the piano today. But I don't pretend that you should do that. I just say that you should do some of it if you're convinced. But in any case, it was beautiful and I congratulate you. I love the Zoom silent applause. This is something I discovered this season of COVID-19. So, I think it's Leandro, right? Leandro? Is he with us?
I'm right here, yeah.
Thank you for unmuting yourself. How long have you played this piece, the Chopin Third Ballade?
Not that long. I think I learned in the first semester of last year, but then I didn't play in the second half, and then I am just studying it right now.
So, would you say that the recording which you made for today was cautious?
I would say that pretty much.
Well, at least I got the message.
Yeah.
Okay, for the introduction, I think it's very important to think mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, re, mi, the scale, and not mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, fa, mi. Because originally it was a scale. And then the term of endearment is to go from above and to hug that E flat, which is the dominant. And so we call it in music an appoggiatura. I don't think there's a musical term for hugging the dominant. But it is a term of endearment. Oh, my dear. Oh, my sweet one. And it's easy to over-affect it. I think that you could play it very expressively with the D. And then add the F as it's written, because we play what is written, without to stop on the F. Because then you delay the second beat and it starts sounding affected before you even started playing the piece. And it's interesting to observe that when you voiced beautifully your bass line 2 bars later, that F was no more as meaningful to you. I think it's always the case when the melody is in the left hand. People always say, oh, that's beautiful. It's such a choice of different range. Think instrumentally. It's a bassooncello, you know. But really, pianistically, it sucks. Because I still think that it's too intellectual to be true. If you play the beginning of the slow movement of the Pathétique, he takes such a special attention to have a melodic bass line. But you still have the melody that prevails the importance to. But still, a leap of an octave is so much more emotional in the bass than what he does in the right hand. And then the Alberti is in the middle. Like this, people say, who is his teacher? What is this edition? Why is he not playing the right notes? I don't hear ever the bass. It's not. It's a bass, not a melody. And I think here you have truly a bass line melodic. And then in the top. So much for Chopin going on the full 4 bars, right? Were you asked to voice the left hand?
No, actually, I already decided to voice it, I think sometimes I could voice it, sometimes it didn't work quite well, but
It's interesting because it's appropriate to know that Chopin used to suggest that the one hand should ignore what the other does, because he had this idea of the melodic, like bel canto singing arias in the one hand and the accompaniment in the other. And here he starts extremely string quartetish. It becomes more pianistic when we have the not to mention, and I appreciated the two hand. I was worried you will play with one hand the octaves of the gruppetto. Were you asked to do that, or was it you again?
when I first tried it, I tried with one hand and I was like, oh, this is kind of hard. Let me try with two hands.
Well, actually, you can if you play 5/4 5/4, and not 5/5 5/5. Even with pedal, it sounds connected awkwardly. But the problem is the thumb, right?
Yeah.
You cannot legato the thumb. And of course, if he had written in sixth, would be easier. But this octaves. And do you think he purposely didn't write it in the notation in the two hands?
Yeah, I was always questioning myself, like, why did he write, like, with one hand? I think, like, we all know that Chopin had, like, a really flexible hand, and that he really played, like, the piano. So I think he could manage to do it, but I was always questioning, like, why didn't he write with two hands, like, this specific?
So the fact is that it's most effective with two hands.
Mm-hmm.
But since we have here a pianist composer, we could wonder if there is something in the gestural dimension, if you know what I mean, besides the wrong note dimension, which is a terrible result if one attempts it with tension. But there is something more about this gruppetto, we call it. I don't know what you call it in Portuguese. When you have many notes in one beat.
A gruppetto would do fine. It's close enough.
That's how I was told. Is that all of a sudden, and this is typical of his imitation of the, or at least that's why we assume, but it's tempting to think so, of the vocalise improvisatory soprano patterns in the bel canto style opera. And the orchestra waits forever, and the soprano is there to demonstrate all her vocalizing capacities, unlike mine. And so, in fact, what becomes evident in his writing is that he stresses so many notes in one beat that you're obliged to take more than one beat to play them all, unless you squeeze them. Hence the rubato. But I don't think it's a 9/8 bar. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. And I never have enough time to play in 2 beats all the octaves. And I always ask the conductor, could you add the third beat? 1, 2, 3, 1. And usually the conductor says, no, it's in 2 beats. Just play all the notes, faster. And so I end up by doing a glissando. But not everybody, because I don't have enough fast fingers to do it. But then that is something with orchestra, you cannot not arrive on the beat. And here at least your left hand is, even if it's a separate hand from your right hand, has to wait to play that E flat on the downbeat. Have you ever tried to play it exactly inside the metric groupment? like written?
Yeah, I tried once, and it sounded really fast, so I was like, oh.
I think it's an expression of anxiety, excitement, and breathlessness. More or less like the tight corsets of his lady auditors in the salons. I'm choking. And of course, when they watch this pianist play, he must have been like Julio Iglesias for them in terms of charismatic star. And so when he imitates the opera, imitating on the piano with more notes, he must have been very effective. How did you do, Frédéric? How did you do all these beats, all these notes in so little beats? The thing is that most of this music was improvised before it was notated for the publisher by him in the salons. And so, who's to know exactly if he didn't, in the notation, edit it? But it remains a fact that some people try to take the least possible extra time, right? Hello?
Yeah.
Did I manage to puzzle you in the first page? Oh, I'm sorry for that. When you do do fa mi mi, it's a bit of the same point that earlier we said with the repeated notes. They're not mi 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 mi. They're mi 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 mi. And so I would not play piano. The first mi mi is written in the dynamic range, which is so unsubtly notated in the middle of the bar, over the two stops. And without the ritenuto. Because if you do do fa, they open appoggiatura and then immediately drop, then you're obliged to. And I find that kills the effect. Of course, you have the chromaticism in the thumb of the left hand. But I still think that the size, should not play subito piano. They should play diminuendo. The first thing that you do with the section of bar, that's this. Do you see where it is? And then, right? And then it goes. So I don't want to be distracted by the right hand. I want to be. I think it's a subliminal continuation, even it's interrupted by the size. It's same. It's typical of people playing the Sixth Nocturne by Fauré, so inspired by Chopin. Opportunities to lose the thread because something is happening somewhere around of the melodic line that like here it gets choppy, and I think of course this then becomes much less meaningful thematically than the descending. I think this chromatic drops of the lament, of the emotional drive, regardless that it's in major, A flat, right? you have these chromaticisms like size that are closer to the minor because it's symbolized by its semitones, any minor. So you have this kind of chromaticism minor colorization in this compared to the full tone of the 6th degree. He doesn't do full minor. It's minor, major. Smile with a tear. And in fact, it relativizes the importance of this gruppetto after all, because if you really thematically continue, you bring out and so whatever you do here is a distraction, but you should still continue to voice the tenor, the top of the left hand, in my opinion. Now, you see in the second page, I don't know if we have the same pagination, the trill. The anticipation F, G flat, or Fa, Sol, bemol. And then, already the G flat is an appoggiatura to the F, but is anticipated. With this anticipated meaning, this impatience. And so, because it's not Baroque, we don't play it on the upper note. My solution is to play F, G flat with the right hand thumb 2. And the left hand plays 4, 3, 2, 1 with the thumb playing the G flat. Louder than the G flat of the anticipation of the second finger of the right hand. 1, 2, 1. It gives it a sense of heroism. Because I think the treatment, as I was saying earlier for the Bach, of the notation of the trill is totally antiquated for Chopin, to notate a trill in 18 whatever it was, 10 or so. Nobody played harpsichord anymore by then. So the trill is a embellishment, is a rhythmized or not. There is a prolongation of the. No, this is more a shaking of a vibrato. I think if the action allowed for his pianos with his technique, he would have repeated it. Originally, before the trillo, in the operas of Monteverdi, which are credited to be among the first operas ever written, you have this expression where the singer repeats the note that is emotional. And it was called trillo. And when it became instrumentalized keyboard-wise, it was very difficult to have the repeated note, especially on the harpsichord, so fast. And I think that's why the neighboring tone that you bite in the mordent, in the trill, and here is more and more meaningfully as a vibrato, as a shaking of the soul. I mean, that's my view of these two trills. When you played cautious earlier, as I mentioned it, is because you delayed every downbeat to make sure you visualize them. Good. Good. It's like watching a tennis game from the side. Because the two hands split. So if it was Cortot, he would say, just watch one and memorize the leap of the other, and that's how he played all the wrong notes. But nobody cared about the right clean note in his time. It was the gestural effect. Oh, ça a marché aujourd'hui. Oh, c'est une bonne chose. One of his students who taught me, ne pas tâter, don't pre-touch the keys. Just jump and land and hope. So it was the exact opposite of the Russian school where you touch, hold, connect constantly the keys. But in any case, it is true that with those leaps, ideally, if you do the left hand, do you change the thumb to the G? Or do you do 1, 2, 3, 5 and then 5 or 2? Or do you do 1, 2, 3 and then 1, 5 under?
I put 1, 5 in the left hand.
So you hold the G or not?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, then that should be not difficult to do without a watch. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I was not holding the first finger. I think I changed the finger, but I was not holding the...
I know you weren't. That's why I'm telling you to do it. Yeah. Because that gives you the security of the 2 octaves. It's so much easier to do when you don't watch. Because you have an imprint of the 2, then the pinky flying in the air to land hopefully on the C. And nobody hears the difference with the pedal. But at least you have... Sounds like the end of the Bach Carol. Which anyway he added after. But the point is that that's one of those things where you have to, I think, look at the right hand. And when you reach the top G in the right hand, I would like you to make a substitution. I know it's a very old-fashioned piano technique. Very old-fashioned. People don't like substitutions anymore. But it works very well. If you can do 1, 2, 3, 1, 5 into 3, and then you can never miss it.
Yeah.
And the left hand. And same thing, 5 into 2, and then the E. This way you're cautious, but you don't show it. The other way you're obliged to show it because you're like, I look at the left, like right, and I cross the street. In terms of your expression in the next page, when you restart the introduction, every pianist has problem with this E flat, no? In the left hand, do, la, me, me. First, don't diminuendo, because you do a beautiful drop of the A flat. You're cursed to do an accent. So either you sustain, and then only replay the second E flat softer, as if it were to be do la famille. In your ear, you should hear do la famille, but you play do la mimi. But if you fear mimi and it doesn't repeat enough, you'll hear a beautifully phrased, and then, whoops. Now you could ask him to do something for you. Write the Chopin Society, they might change it for you. So much more sophisticated. But no, we're here to play what he wrote, therefore we want to play it also melodic being repeated. For which I think you should diminish the second E flat and not the A flat before the 2 E flats. Because you cannot build up again. Do, la, mi, mi. You cannot do that with the voice, yes, but not on the piano. This doesn't work. Now, when you start the dance, do, 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 do you think that there is a ritenuto before that? And you want it to end the introduction as a separate piece, and then you start like introduction and dance.
Yeah, I feel like a closing. Maybe I'm doing too much like ritenuto, but I don't know. Now you made me question myself.
Generally, the philosophers say that the trip is the destination. And here the destination obviously is the dominant to the tonic. But so much is going before that it distracts us from this nothing but a perfect cadence. And then it becomes so distractive that we lose the point of it, which is to arrive on the tonic. So either you play it purposefully and you play without emotion, or then you say, oh, ladies and gentlemen, this transition is just amazing. All my life in each of these notes is resumed. You know that anybody doesn't play anymore the Sphinx in the carnival. And I wonder why, because it has the same kind of so what is it? I don't think I'm playing the right keynotes actually. But I've noticed most recordings today, people bypass the Sphinx in the carnival. They just go over it. They don't even play it. They go to Papillon. And I think these bass notes very often on the Romantic era composers like Schumann, Chopin, Liszt, and of course Mendelssohn are very mysterious or evocative of a mystery. And in a way the chord is sweet. It's like it says, okay gentlemen, let's now start the piece because it's grand time. It's been 2 pages. I wait for this. And I noticed that you give a very beautiful impulsive accent on the top note. Is that what you were told, what you heard in the piece when you read it? Or is it a result of both, perhaps?
I think when I first read it, I tended to do it, but when I had some lessons with my teacher, he also told me to do it.
So it's an ostinato? Because most of the time we think ostinato is only in the bass. I'm in the wrong key today. Forgot it. Anyway, I think it is an ostinato. By the virtue of the fact that it's the same note. And all of a sudden, it's step motion. But here, he doesn't do. So I think you said your teacher asked you to do this accent?
Yeah, my teacher encouraged me when I told him about it.
Do you hold it over the thumb?
Yeah.
Because of the slur, right?
Yeah.
impressed with the secondary voice. The intellectual expression, you know, it's not just Chopin. It's also Chopin with inter voices. People assume that Chopin was less, wrongly obviously, less polyphonic, less rich in his texture than Schumann. So you have the pro-Schumanns and the pro-Chopins, and I'd say, I don't care. The melody in Chopin is unbelievable. It doesn't need anything, really. It's unforgettable perfume. Oh, I loved her so much. What is her name? Monique? I don't know. And I find that when you bring out, as you did the second time, that secondary voice, is it because it's written, because you were told, or because you realize that, oh my God, I have to bring that out?
I mean, since when I first read it, that caught my attention.
Yeah, and so, but it distracted you from the melody, right?
Yeah.
That's the typical thing that happens in young couples holding hand in the garden, having a walk, and very attractive lady passes across, and the boy usually follows her with the eyes, and the girl pulls his hand that they're holding and says, what does she have that I don't? And I think that translated here, the secondary voice is an attractive distraction to this pure melody. And it's very difficult to manage the two. How much is too much, or how much is not enough? Bringing out that secondary melody.
Yeah, that's true.
I think you must have heard it very loudly played by many, no?
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about this. Right? And then... But that's what he doesn't do, right? Everything is on the second beat. Da 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 one, da da two, da da one, da da two, da da one, da da two, da da one, two. It's before two. It's on one. And I think that this anticipation compared to the downbeatish melodic line for the last 8 bars before should be played in a rubato earlier, even more so. Of course, you have the teachers in Germanic countries who would say, you're the craftsman, he's the artist, meaning Chopin. So you don't have to, on top of it, put makeup on the piece and say, it's so astonishing that he grabs it before the second beat that if I add a little accelerando and I go too early on it to express that, I overstate it. And a theater director often would say, don't overplay your character, you know. Ravel was told, do you like the interpretation of your piece? And he would say, on ne m'interprète pas, on me joue. One doesn't give interpretations of my music, one plays my music. Because he considered interpretation, like Stravinsky did too, as a betrayal. I think is wrong. But anyway, my point is that I think that if you study in a Hochschule in Deutschland, they will make sure that you don't anticipate it. Because the approach there is that the music is to be served with earnestness and a certain distance from the artistic endeavor that is embedded in it, which is sufficient the way it's written. In other words, the piece is written by the composer more than interpreted by the composer. We interpret it.
Yeah.
So I still think honestly that it doesn't hurt, but that's my personal taste, and it could be very bad taste, to anticipate it over the anticipation of his own rhythmicity. But that's something I wanted to tell you about. Also, I wanted to tell you about this section. Do you see where it is? It's I don't have board numbers. I'm so sorry.
It is 65. I found it here.
Oh, good. So the fact is that even if you legato over, let's say, hold the right hand's bottom part, the only one that he really wanted to be overheld is the E of the leading tone that does an accaciatura delayed resonance. Well, actually, technically, an accaciatura would be an appoggiatura up, which means climb. But because it's tied, it's in fact a rising suspension, or in music theory in America, it's called a retardation. But it is very ambiguous because you have mi, fa, re, la, fa, sol, mi, la, fa. And the mi, la is a diminished fourth that bypasses the leading tone's resolution to the third, and then only resolves it on the third eighth note. Plus holds it over the F. And I find that on top of that you have the repeated notes. And the soprano says, it's me, watch me. And you listen to the mezzo. And then people say, but it's so beautiful in the thumb of the tenor or the left hand. And so it becomes this difficulty. Where you wish you don't actually, but you would have said a little of Alberti, and we drive forward. But in fact, it gives that sense of rich secondary voices plus the melodic line. That was what you did since the beginning, right? Is that his music is so beautiful in the melodic line, but also in the secondary voices harmonic build-up of juice, of energy, of sensuality, of emotion, of everything, that in order to play all the layers in a certain hierarchy, you have to make a decision. And if you don't make a decision, it sounds very much chopped. I mean, obviously that is one of the major problems with Chopin, is when he has secondary beautiful voices. Did you notice that he doesn't write in his edition any ritenuto for the arrival in C major? Oh, so sweet. I didn't need you to offer me this ring, Frédéric. So beautiful. But all of a sudden we have this, C major. I guess it's the second rose of the two roses to smell of Richter. But I noticed that you prolong the striking of the modulation with the ritenuto. So is it an acknowledgement, or is it that if you play it straight, it sounds like you're not emotionally enough invested?
I think when I played, I felt that I needed like the rhythm into it because it's so different from what came previously.
That's exactly what in the Hochschules they'll tell you. The modulation is enough. So ultimately, the question is how much you involve yourself compared to uninvolve yourself. And in some people's opinion, you need to involve yourself, and in some, you should less. For instance, Ekir says in his edition, the New Polish, that all the grace notes are on the bass note. Right?
Yeah.
And that's what you did.
Yeah, I think not the first one. When I first learned, I didn't know that, but when I had a lesson, they told me, and I just.
You see, so that is terrible. If the lesson is the moment to shatter your emotional intent in terms of your intuition, then that's not right. I have an option that could be the middleman. Play it on the beat if you want, with the bass, but consider the downbeat starting when you reach the top note. 1, 2, 3, 1. But if you play a long grace note on the downbeat, that takes at least an eighth note out of the 3, then in fact you don't play a dotted quarter, you play a quarter tide. And even more so. Of course, if you play it before the beat, then you have the tiny fermatina before the beat. But I think that even if you play it on the beat, you should not shorten the thematic note that starts the bar, which is the high note, which is, of course, beautifully delayed by the arpeggiation to single it out. But if you single it out by shortening it, then you take away from the tension release. Even orchestration, it doesn't matter because the violins will play on the downbeat, the harp will play blah, 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 and everybody plays different timbres, so they don't have to align or not align. But on the piano, it's so evident that it doesn't. Congratulations, I was wondering when you played the famous C-Do flat. Was it at the first reading that you noticed it? All these old-fashioned roof antenna ledger lines?
Yeah, it wasn't the first.
You know how many pianists play? You've never done it, huh? You've never done that. You knew right away it was an octave.
Yeah. I have never done that.
Good, because in the modern notation, it would have been in the treble clef on the right hand stem, because it's difficult to read so many ledger lines for most pianists. Where does the do flat, the do bemol, the C flat, go in your opinion? In terms of melodic.
It goes probably to the D flat.
Good. So why didn't you play that? I mean, either or. But I think that it's probably because you must have been told not to bring it out too much. Or also because you're so distracted by the leak of the right hand, as jazz people would say. That's 1 or 10. But anyway, no, seriously, because you get distracted by this, no? So the D flat is part of the dominant, but no more the follow-up. But did you hear it because you read it, or did you hear it when you played it, or you never hear it when others played?
I think when I read it, it became clear to me.
It did, huh?
Yeah.
There is something to talk about the C sharp minor section. Since the piano is only one single keyboard, you cannot have a pedal for the right hand melodically and a pedal for the left hand chromaticisms. So you're obliged to finger pedal. There's a beautiful coda like this in the A minor K511 Mozart Rondo. It's very rare that they write in the low register such a intense fast notes but soft legato. Do, re, fa, mi, re, mi, la, sol, fa, sol, re, do, si, do, re, mi, fa, sol, sol, la, sol. And I think because the melody is in the right hand, I think you should play the left hand completely subdued. If not, it becomes a distraction between the two. You hold this, but it decays. This is expressive. Then you pick up again. And then because the repeated notes in the melody follow, and then the right hand picks up again. So it becomes an alternative interest. And I think it should be linear throughout. But that's without pedal, because if you put the right foot pedal, then you cannot play the chromaticisms in the low register. When you reach the famous jubilational moment, I think the melodic line of the right hand in terms of its arching is on 4 bars of 6/8. But the left hand accompaniment, which is harmonically, it swings by 2 beats with an ascending arpeggio. So don't let the right hand become that. That's typical where the right hand doesn't talk to the left hand.
Yeah.
As if you have 16 strings and the left hand played by the brass. And for the coda, I really think that you should play it with one hand. And if you turn your thumb with the nail to the F, looking down, then you have room to pass the 4th on E flat without to turn the wrist in a rotational situation. And then once you play the E flat on the 4th finger, you let the thumb go out of the keyboard in the out of space and then land again. So that you don't have to do the wrist, because if you do the wrist, it will sound like going too fast on speed bumps. Which is easily, of course, mitigated with the 2 hands. But you know, the problem is that the arrangement makes it so easy that it loses its driven tension towards the arrival point. I mean, if at some point you play the 3rd ballade of Chopin in your life, it's sort of understood that you can play an arpeggio. And I think that I was surprised that you did that. That's why I told you earlier, I think you're a little bit overly cautious, no? Have you tried it with the right hand alone and missed it? Is that the problem?
I tried it and I didn't miss it, but.
Or were you told to do the arrangement?
No, I was not told to do the arrangement. I think I played originally with one hand, and then one day I tried with two hands, and I said, oh, like it is working well. So.
Okay. The last thing I wanted to say is the tempo of these last four chords. For some reason, you decided to give us an adagio, an andante, something very stately. 5 of 6 and 5 of 1. And because it comes on this flow, I think it's more intuitively natural to go, if not even as he wrote, a little less slow than he wrote. But if on top of it you slow down, it's like, wow, secondary dominance rule, you know. Because in the fourth ballade, he has the secondary dominants that go faster than you can even hear them. Oh my god, there's too many. And here it's just so stretched. I think if he wrote it 8th note, quarter note, 8th note, it would be more like that's Rachmaninoff, I think. I don't think it said to be written, it has to be accelerando, but I don't think it should slow down from the arpeggio. Or then it sounds to me too emphatic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's the first time I teach somebody in their kitchen. Is that the kitchen?
Yeah, that's the kitchen.
It's so suitable for a masterclass, which is really cooking the piece, right?
Yeah. The perfect metaphor.
So, which piano, in which room are you, Jinju? Are you in Professor our studio? I don't think she hears me, right?
Hello, Professor.
Hi, Jinju, where are you?
I'm in the Professor Hours studio in here right now.
I love that studio.
Yeah, me too.
I have spent countless hours reading his collection of manuscript copies during auditions.
Oh, right.
Especially Iberia. Edward's collection of facsimiles is unbelievable. Complete everything. Chopin, Beethoven. Unforgettable days auditioning in MU 104.
Yeah.
That was an homage to Edward's collection of manuscripts. Okay, go ahead. Do you mind playing the theme and the first variation, and we work on this group of two first? And I'll be very to the point, this way we can do some more.
Did I play without the repeat?
Yeah, let's go IU style, no repeat.
Okay.
And we stop here at the recap. No, that's not, that there's no recap today, so it's okay. Thank you. When you play like the bar before the last in the before the repeat, when you have I want you to stab my heart with the A on the fourth beat of the bar before. And then make a diminuendo on the mi, re, do, si, do octaves, so that you have the resonance of the A on the downbeat. A 6/4 chord by virtue of the suspension. But if you don't play it loud and you play loud the octaves, we hear a 6th chord on the downbeat by omission, but in fact it's La, Sol, Sol, Do. Yes? Edward disagrees?
Oh, yeah, I think so. But someone say.
I think it's Edward, right? Please tell us.
Did we say something?
I thought I heard Edward commenting, and I wanted to know if he disagrees with me because I was just giving this opinion of the A. Was it because of that, or?
No, it was between me and Yuexuan Wang
We're checking the tempo. Yeah, so
It
you
says
didn't say
un
anything.
poco più vivo, but then the metronome speed is from Schumann is terribly slow, and that's all we were talking about.
And that's also because of that the decaying A dies even more, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we should never trust a metronome marking of a composer. Never. I've premiered so many pieces of living composers, it never corresponds. I think it's a fantasy in their mind when they hear it in their inner world. And when it comes out, it's unplayable for some reasons. Either too fast, too slow. But I agree that it's if you don't play the hairpin crescendo to the La of the last beat, I mean, I need to hear that is not yet G sharp on the downbeat. And he doesn't restrike it. It could appear a detail, but it is a factual thing about the 6th degree. That is the emotional, the minor 6, the appoggiatura, again the hug of the dominant, which you have in the beginning of the variation, Jinju. The only accent is on the La, on the A, which is the 6th degree. Are usually rhythmic, march-like, possibly driven by a pulse. You could well play. It's more rhythm than melody. But then the 4th beat is so emotional. 4 notes, ya da 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 da. But not the first 3 beats. First 3 beats is like, nah, not for me. Yeah. But then, and I think that 4th beat holding into the next first beat is overlapping here. It's sort of an expression of that appoggiatura, which becomes a suspension. Do you think it's impossible?
No, I agree with your opinion for the suspension.
Oh, you're so kind.
Yeah.
I like when I hear that, even if I think that it's too early to accept.
Okay.
You deal with it and see how much you can bring the octave softer. I mean, if I was Clara and I read that bar and I tell Bob, it's about time to octave the A rather than the E, D, C sharp. But I doubt that she called him Bob. Though who knows? But for sure, he couldn't play to save his life. And so obviously she was the one to play his music, and beautifully so. But factually, the note that is the most important is a single note, and all the others are octave. In the low register, couldn't be more heavy. Why not? Octave, the French horn held quarter note, if it's so important to become a suspension. I think it's why in most recordings you don't hear it, right?
Yeah.
You do a beautiful escapism. This is the first ballade. And then, unfortunately, it was so good to visit the cousin who has this beautiful estate. It seems like a liberation from this already very dark C-sharp minor. Whoa, what happened? He derailed. He should have gone on G-sharp, the dominant. But he goes into a chromatic drop. A bar to return, right? But it takes one beat to drop out of there. So it's all of a sudden you're thrown in the space, and then you find a way to inch in back to yourself in G sharp minor. And I find that already notated ritenuto should not reach the point of escapism where you want to stay there. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great piece, but I really wished it was in C major. To stay here because it's really fun here. Everything is better here. But this is so anguishing. And I know that it's tempting to overstate it, but this is exactly the point of the German teaching too. If it's embedded in the harmonic modulation surprise, then you don't need to add the ritenuto at all. Or if you do, because it's written, I think very little in order to still signify, yes, it's striking, but I'm still on a mission, which is I have to go back to C sharp minor. Granted, not. That's why it's easy to overstate that. When you play the opening subject, the theme, right, with the chords, have you ever read the little text underneath?
Even the tempo signature or like andante or
Usually it's on the bottom of the first page. It says that this melody was written by an amateur. Or a Liebhaber in German, I guess it would have been. And it's specifically in the notation, very often they put the harmonization in smaller font in order to visualize clearly the theme melodically. So he could have done. Any arpeggio would have worked, and God forbid in the fantasy he doesn't not do that. But in this case, he chooses a chorale setting. And because the problem is that the melody of this amateur from the city of Esch, but that's another story, his theme is an arpeggio. It's exactly what Beethoven does in the Appassionata. Wow, striking. I want to have a theme, and I'm playing a chord arpeggio? Is that striking? Normally you do patterns of motivic element if you want to be thematic. So it's very difficult to play this melodically thematic while harmonized, and on top of it he harmonizes it with chords. It's like take it in dictation and write the Roman numerals, 1, 4, 1, the plagal cadence, 5, 1, 4, 5, 5 of 5. It's almost didactical, a little bit like Mendelssohn does in the series variations. This kind of ACTB writing, choral. And I think that it would be helpful if you play much softer than you already do the chords. Like... because you already do. You don't play them as loud as the melody. Or as thick in terms of arpeggio, chordal. What do you do with that trill? Do you measure it? Do you lift the finger? Do you use 1, 2? Or you do use left hand 1, 2, 1?
I use just 1, 2 with my right hand.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And every time you have an eighth note, the trill stops. I think you need a page turner hand. The third hand. Originally, it might work for those who have large hands to play the trill with 2, 3 in the right hand and the melody around with the chords. But that demands a very stretched left hand to be able to play. What is it? Originally is octave, and then C, D, D. That's very stretched for most people's left hand, no? But then you can trill with 1, 2 alone without to play a melody. So one hand is only for the trill, and one hand is only for the melody and the harmony. It's too large for your left hand, no? Yeah. So then you have to manage to practice so that you don't get to stop the trill on each quarter note of the right hand. I know you don't want to. Can you repeat, please? You spoke too fast, Professor.
Maybe I cannot connect you for a while, so can you speak again?
Yes, of course, of course, of course. So the trill has to be independent from the emotional shouldn't restart the trill with the thumb when you play the beats of the right hand on top of it. It's too much start and stop. It should be continuous, like a shaking. Which is why I suggested one hand for the trill and one hand for the chords, but that demands too much stretching, right? What do you think of the last bar indication? Dynamically.
First of all, it has the question in the first, the measure 13, that
And then?
And then this is third the surprise.
And then? Because the theme ends on the C sharp. And he decides to have a transition before the first variation with a crescendo. You know how anti-intuitive, contra-emotional, anti-musical this is. It's like, I cannot do it, but I have to. Oh, it feels so good. Really? Not too much, just a little. It's like negotiating with Schumann. So I think that you did very well the melodic bulge to the E, then the diminuendo. If it started there on the first variation. But because of this question at the end of the affirmation, I think you need to really dare it. In the Judeo-Christian type of statements, of opinions, one is always afraid to voice one's opinion, so one ends with a no. Especially in Spanish. ¿Cómo no? No? In English it's, I'm afraid. But I'm not afraid. I say what I want. But no. And if you hear Spanish people, they always end up every sentence with no. Expecting your acquiescence. Yeah, yes, of course. And so it seems to me exactly the same. He already finished and concluded. And all of a sudden, isn't it? And I rarely hear it played literally like notated. It's so counterintuitive for real musicians. For those whom it means nothing, it's very easy to do because it's there. They don't connect their emotional, intuitive tension release rapport to the tonal system and all that. Okay, let's do 2 and 3. Do the third one, so we do 2 in a once. Please. Congratulations! Oh my God! Day and night with your recording for the top notes. I was gonna talk to you about up, jolt, wrist, and arm to the second repeated note, like in the bowing, and you did it compared to the recording.
Yeah.
That reminds me of these press agents of the political candidate who's gonna come in town, and they want so much to be a success that they tell everybody, you know, he's very good, but not a great speech teller. And then he makes it more or less okay, and people go, wow, he's good. It's exactly the feeling I had thinking, in the recording, you couldn't align a single repeated top note. And now you played like, you know, Paulini age 5 or something. It's amazing. How did you practice it? Did you use the wrist up?
Like I did lots of the methods to practice this variation. Like.
But how about the repeated? The middle, the top note.
I just reverse the order, like.
So it's the wrist, or is it just the arm?
Maybe finger and the wrist and the arm. Just I think about the circle, like, or like, yeah, relaxing.
You see, again, we have a problem with repeated notes. Already this differently. If only he had written or under. But thankfully he didn't do that. But to play the repeated notes as you did tonight is marvelous. To play them like you did at the recording, it was very, very leaving me hungry. So for the variation before, there is one thing that you do systematically, which is the 16th note rest of the first group of 6 16th notes, which are in fact 5 in notes, right? You know what I mean? You have a fermata on each. It's like, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot serve everybody at the same time. So I'll serve first the melody and the bass, and then that you do it sometime when it's really too stretched, perhaps. But if it's systematic, it's impossible. It defeats the purpose. Which means that you have to shift, anticipate, as if you are doing braille, you know, like you stay on the keys and you just glide. You're used by now to take so much time that every 2 beats rather, we have an interruption. And you don't do it purposely, it's an accumulative effect, you know what I mean? That means you have to shift faster from the bass note to the second 16th note of the left hand stop stems. And instead you do and that doesn't work because it takes away from that anxiety of the repeated notes, which should have their own shape. A little bit shaped towards the repeated note. Ta 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 ta. It should be boiling. It shouldn't be organized and one after you, you after me. You know. There is one thing you did in the recording and today, which I noticed, is that, and it's very usually the case with many people, and they play so sol do. When the one is thematic melodic 30 seconds, and then to delay the do sharp of the downbeat, he adds a grace note between the 30 seconds. So So it shouldn't be equalized to become rhythmically two equal notes. Ta ta ta. It should be ta ta ta. So I would suggest to stretch a bit the 32nd in order to give a chance to the grace note to be shorter. So you can play a melodic note leap with a grace note inside, but not ta 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 ta, because it sounds literally like you played 2/64. Yeah, the other question is the pedal. Can you take off the pedal every second, fourth, sixth, and eighth note? Like pedal, no pedal. Pedal, no pedal. Pedal, no pedal. Even if you lose some of the bass notes outside of a resonant acoustic. Because you hold the full harmony, the repeated notes, in fact, with the dampers up, it's like a snowflake effect, and in fact it kills the melody. It should be its own internal stretto, and then. Changing the pedal or not playing it on the second, fourth, sixth, and eighth note, you allow for the residue of the resonance to die instead of to amplify. Even if you lose a bass note, but in a good acoustic you won't. I have to ask you if you would like to play for me the most difficult bar of the piece. Don't you find that to be one of the most difficult bars? Probably not for you, right?
No, I think so for this part. And yeah.
And the reason for the difficulty is that in fact he plays twice faster these 4 beats than the tempo of the theme. That with an accelerando is piece of cake. Instead of that, he stresses you to play twice faster with a crescendo and a pedal and an appoggiatura octaves, which on the modern piano sound like trombones playing the wrong note. So you cannot play the pedal beyond the first 16th note in order to clear this. But if you hold it, it becomes that soup of notes that nobody understands what the hell is happening except, yes, Schumann is rushed to get to the tonic in half the time. I always wonder what would happen if somebody dares play in concert the version with larger beats. Of course, it doesn't exist. Oh, I have all the time to do everything. And in fact, in this bar, I have time to do nothing. Everything collides. But that's the beauty of its anxiety, drive, crescendo. It's a written accelerando rhythmically, right? But you're going to work on that. What do you do about the trill in variation 3? It's like a friend to whom you say, hey, no, I really don't have time to have a cup of tea with you because I really have to play a lot of other things, you understand? Which is... And I have to fetch distant bass, play 30 seconds staccato, or spiccato like the violinist would do, and then have a trill in my third hand, naturally. So my suggestion is to cheat by playing a little longer that last beat and delaying the last 30 seconds of the right hand. Sorry. Slightly stretch it to give it more busyness in the trill. If you busy up the trill, it won't sound that slowed down, but it will be the chromatic ascendant, which the trill is enhancing. It's literally a vibrato. But because so much is going on, we have time for a mordent. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't have time to play all these notes. You understand? I have 30 seconds in the right hand, I have a fetch bass to tenor, and the trill is like, gosh, can't I whistle it? So I personally put a fermata on that A sharp. But you have to tell the right hand to delay the next notes. Okay, let's hear 4 and 5. That's going to be fun. Continue? Two in a row. How sweet. When you have the only bar that doesn't have a dotted rhythm, you need to rush. Why?
Like the figure, just the natural, just like. And then we have the crescendo, and then the figure is like the focus in each other.
I see. That's very wise. Have you ever played this bar with the dotted rhythms of the other bars?
Sorry?
Have you ever tried to think outside of the box, as we say, and try once to play this bar with equal staccato eighth notes, but with the dotted rhythms of the rest of the bars before? Tam padam pam padam pam padam pam. It's somehow I'm suggesting that you try it now. Do you mind trying?
Yeah.
Thank you. All of a sudden you have no desire to rush it. So if I provocatively tell you that Schumann forgot to write the dotted rhythms in this bar, you won't believe me, right? Of course you shouldn't, because it's silly. That in the Romantic era of music, we have expressions that are so very spontaneous, is what differentiates us from, you guess, right? And that's beautiful because it's guessable. Organizing the chaos of nature by the form of Haydn. And here it seems to be free speech. But you observe is the only bar without the dotted rhythm. But your logic was very good. So I will let you do what you did, but I agree to disagree. Also, because it's beautiful, by the way, with the accelerando too. I think that when you play these two variations in a row especially, you realize that they're sort of twins with an extra beat for the next one, right? Because you have the ternary tam pa dum pum compared to the pum pum pim pum. I think Prokofiev learned a lot from this variation or etude. But imagine you have not heard Prokofiev or Bartok or Stravinsky or any composer who did these effective because in Schumann time nobody heard it. And I think that the amount of sforzando that you give it is so cut, and it's very tempting to do because it's super effective on the modern piano. But I think in the context it should be a little milder staccato, a little milder soft sforzando. And I would say that the way to manage the dosage of the sforzando versus the chords that don't have it is to define how loud and precisely cherry-picked will be the chords that don't have. So if you play all the chords that don't have an accent or a sforzando, and you manage to have it staccato, perhaps mezzo piano, mezzo forte, whatever you want, so that when you have the one that has the bulge, it would be justified by the drop on the note that doesn't have it. And if it's too much of a drop, I lose the melody. Because it becomes too chopped. I mean, I understand that aesthetic, but I think in Schumann's time that was not yet the aesthetic of this supercut. I would play milder sforzando and less soft chords that are not sforzando. Now it's time for your favorite too. With this. No wonder he wrote this toccata. He loves those things. Go ahead.